I'm just gonna wait for like a minute or so, Rick.
Okay,
I'm still showing 12:50, 12:59.
okay.
I think we are still having some people log in,
Okay.
join.
And you'll just give me an introduction and then I'm off to the races.
Yeah.
Where are you from, by the way?
I grew up in Turkey.
Ah, okay. Near Istanbul?
The coast, Izmir, Smyrna.
Mm-hmm. I have a very good friend from Turkey. I think Istanbul is probably where she lives.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful city.
Always have wanted to go there.
Gorgeous. The coast is really beautiful.
Hmm.
I think I'm just gonna wait one more minute. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ezra Calvert with Entrada Insights on behalf of TTRA. Welcome. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. All lines are muted and everyone is on listen-only mode. We'll be using the chat feature of Zoom for Q&A after Rick's presentation. And all the PowerPoint and recording of this session will be available to you. So please don't worry about taking notes. Just enjoy the session. Our guest today is Rick Garlick with Maggot. He's the Vice President of Strategy, and he's a consultant there. He's an executive with the company's travel, leisure, and hospitality practice. He plays a key role in consumer-centered business insights and strategies. Rick is a global industry expert. He is very well known in the industry, frequent speaker in some of the news channels as well. We are very glad to have him today. He's going to talk about trust and some of the measurement efforts they have taken at Maggot. And I'm sure you're going to love seeing some of those results, especially from the perspective of trust. Rick, thank you for being with us today. The mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Ezra. First of all, let me just say it's a pleasure to be back with the TTRA. I've been involved in the past and have recently rejoined, and I'm looking forward to a long association with the organization and sharing this data and other data with you as we continue our relationship. So, like many of you, I have seen a wide range of studies out in the field that look at the impact of COVID-19 in the travel sector. We undertook our own, and a lot of what we look at, we deliberately try to look at different aspects than what many of the other studies like Skift and JD Power and some of the others are presenting. We have begun tracking this on a bi-monthly basis. We're sort of waiting to see what market changes take place in order to determine the next wave. But the study originally was planned as a 20-minute length study. It's actually probably closer to 25 minutes, and we actually get people to participate. So I believe we have some very good data. We asked about 11 different industries. Today I'll primarily talk about the hotel and airline segments because we've got a relatively short period of time. You can see that the first wave that we fielded was at the beginning of April, and we just completed the second wave. The first responses for each wave, which is pretty similar to national polls that are taken by organizations like Gallup and others. And one of the things that I'll just sort of preface the presentation with is I've seen a lot of the results from other presentations, and some tend to be a bit more maybe optimistic than the one I'm going to be showing you today. And a lot of it has to do, as you researchers know, with sampling. And some will look at frequent travelers as their sample. We look at a general population sample. So when we look at the results, we think about all of the efforts that the travel industry has undertaken in every segment to provide reassurances to re-engage the public. So I just put a few samples here on this particular slide, but we've all seen the emails, we've all seen the marketing messages, we've all seen all of the missives coming out of the various segments of the travel sectors, trying to convince people that they can trust them and that they can re-engage safely. But the results that I'm about to show you show that despite these tremendous efforts, the impact has been largely negligible. And what do we mean by that? When you look at the percentages who believe that the virus is easily spread through travel activities, we know that that's really what increases or impacts the comfort in re-engaging. We can see that there has been indeed some downward trending, but the numbers are still very high. So for example, when we took this study in the initial wave, we found that 78% either agreed. That number's gone down to 69, which is a statistically significant reduction, but still very high. Airports 76 down to 68, cruise lines 71 down to 76, fitness centers 75 to 65, restaurants 65 to 56, and hotels 66 to 55%, and private vacation rentals 55 to 42. We'd all agree that those numbers are still remarkably high in terms of the number of people that believe COVID-19 is easily spread in each of those venues. When we look at intention to re-engage, this is not a forecasting tool, but we have actually been able to forecast future intention and have had a pretty good track record of success in that route. But when you look at the percentages who say that they plan to re-engage within the next month, the next 6 months, the next 12 months, over the past 2 months, even though generally we're seeing people feeling a little bit better about the coronavirus and just their safety and comfort in going out of the house, we really don't see a lot of shift in terms of the numbers. So for example, we see a 4 percentage point increase in the percentage who say that they plan to stay overnight for hotel leisure in the next 6 months, from 38% to 42%. While that is statistically significant, that still doesn't feel like much of an increase. And when you look at the percentage who say that within the next 6 months they plan to engage in these various travel activities other than taking a driving trip, the numbers are still not what we would certainly like to see them be. We also asked about spending even a year from now, and 1 in 3 basically expect to be spending less on travel a year from now. Now, again, what's discouraging about this number is that when you look at what they responded in wave 1, it was 29% said that they would either be spending moderately or significantly less. That number now has risen to 35% in the second wave. So again, it's one of those things that we're just simply not seeing much of an impact for all the strong messages telling people, hey, we're taking all these precautions, we're doing all these things to make travel safe, we're cutting capacity, we're encouraging social distancing, all these sorts of things just don't seem to be having a lot of impact on travel intentions. Now, we believe that trust is a major hurdle in this whole process. And this is something that we don't see other studies particularly talking about, because trust is a very emotional thing. If I tell you that the subways are safe, but you believe that they're dangerous to ride on, you won't ride on those no matter how many statistics I give you or how many police are patrolling or whatever people are doing. It's not necessarily going to affect your belief, because if you don't feel you can trust something, then you're simply not going to behave in a manner in accordance. So when we look at trust, let's look at the numbers. The travel and hospitality and leisure sectors have not even gained any ground. In fact, some sectors have even fallen behind. So for example, we see restaurants and bars, the percentage who have high trust, either they completely or have a good amount of trust, we see them dropping from 47% to 40%. Attractions, 39 down to 33. Professional sports, 37 to 31. Now, in most of the sectors that we had 2 waves of data on, so for example, hotels and resorts, you see has pretty much stayed the same. 42% last time, 41% this time. So a lot of stable. Airlines went from 40 to 36. Rental cars, 35 to 44. No change. And then some of the secondary areas, we do see some decline from last wave to this wave. So certainly, if you want to say, well, those numbers aren't particularly large, maybe it's not eroding that much, it's certainly not going in the direction that we would like to be seeing. So when we look at what people are comfortable doing, we see that 73% say that they're comfortable traveling within the state that they live. 65% say they're comfortable traveling regionally. So when you look at all the other numbers, it's less than 50% who say that they're somewhat or very comfortable domestically within the lower 48, 55%. But when we start looking at any international travel, that's certainly, the numbers are definitely telling us that people do not have any intention anytime soon of traveling internationally. So it seems like the best travel opportunities are trying to focus on within state and regional travelers in order to get them to re-engage. There's a whole number of statistics that I'll share just a couple with, and as Ezra mentioned, we're going to make this presentation deck available to you. You can see, for example, 50% said that they'd rather take a road trip than a flight when traveling. 44% will schedule a call rather than travel by air for in-person meetings. 43%, using carry-on luggage to avoid other handling of bags, and a full third don't believe that or trust that planes are thoroughly sanitized flights. Hotels, same sorts of things. 66% say that shared amenities at hotels increase the spread of virus. So 2 out of 3 people. Here's one that obviously is concerned for the hotel industry, that almost half expect to pay less if they're not receiving all the amenities they received before. So if you go to a hotel and you're not getting breakfast, you're not being able to use the fitness facilities, or a full service hotel, you can't use the lounge or the restaurants or the pools, travelers expect to actually be charged less money for that experience. 34% believe that getting the coronavirus is more likely at hotels than vacation rentals. And again, almost 30% don't trust that hotel rooms are thoroughly sanitized between guests. So these are some pretty high statistics, just in terms of people not fully believing and embracing the procedures that people are taking to increase their health and safety protocols. So one of the things that, even though we just said that travelers expect to pay less for things that are taken away, one of the things that I think is encouraging is that people have indicated a willingness to pay more in certain cases for enhanced safety protocols. So one of the questions that certainly is something, and here's the numbers and the statistics that bear out the statement I made about people expecting to pay less. We show top box, the people that strongly agree here, but in certain cases show the top 2 boxes, and in the case of hotels, for example, almost 50%. But one of the questions that I was certainly asking myself, and my customers and clients were asking me, is the friction that's created by all these upgraded health and safety protocols, is it enough to deter people from actually wanting to travel and engage? So when I think about going out to a restaurant, and I know that restaurants are at 50% capacity from what they were pre-COVID-19, and I know that that restaurant was already crowded and I had a long wait, I may say to myself, well, it's really not worth going anymore. I just am going to stay home rather than deal with the hassles. And all of the presumed inconveniences and the risks that you take, are they enough to really deter people? Happily, the data say no. When you look at, for example, airlines, we ask basically on a 1 to 100 scale, ask people to rate how would these things affect their likelihood to engage in the airline experience. You can see that for almost all of the different procedures and protocols that people might take to improve the quality of air safety and airline safety, you can see that most of those people respond very positively to and say, no, they would actually make me more likely to travel rather than less likely. And there's nothing that we proposed in this particular study that would deter people from the travel experience by having those increased protocols. I think it's also interesting when you ask people, would you be willing to pay more, or do you consider these basic expectations? You can see everything on the left side, the bars on the left side of the page in this slide, they're all things that people say, no, I expect these things. I would not be willing to pay more. But there are certain things, for example, for airlines, limiting main capacity cabin to 50% to give customers extra space. You know, most people say that they would be willing to pay more for that. Electrostatic spraying and sanitation mist on gate areas, jet bridges, and plane cabins is something that people would be willing to pay significantly more to get. So hopefully the airlines can make up some of the money, lost revenues in these upgraded safety protocols by recognizing that customers might be willing to pay some more to have that extra sense of safety. Same thing with hotels. We see that most of the things that hotels would do to increase safety for guests are things that guests would welcome and certainly not deter them from travel. And similarly, there's certain things that people would be willing at least to pay a little bit more for, maybe not a whole lot more, but then there's also the things on the left side that represent for the hotel industry expectations of, you know, no, we wouldn't pay for this. We would expect that you would do these things, things like contactless digital check-in, a la carte service from restaurants with digital menus, all those sorts of things that are probably going to represent some cost to hotels, will represent some cost to hotels to implement. So hopefully they'll be able to recognize that there are some things that people would see as value and be willing to pay for, even though they might create a bit more friction in the experience, they would see them as being worthwhile to improve health and safety outcomes. So when we think about the challenges, when we ask people essentially a whole series of questions about what are the things that make you trust more, what are the things that make you trust less, one of the things that we see right off the bat is that basically travelers don't trust you, and you being at this point the travel sectors, the airlines, the hotels, the museums, the attractions, don't trust that those safety protocols will actually be maintained and observed. So we think back, for example, to the case of United Airlines when people were expecting that they'd get on a flight and not find anybody in the middle seats and the planes were packed. So there's a trust and credibility issue with the travel sectors themselves. The second challenge is obviously that travelers think that the travel sector is a petri dish for facilitating and generating the COVID-19 virus. And that's a challenge, obviously, to convince people otherwise. But the biggest challenge is probably the fact that travelers don't trust other people. So even today, I was reading an article that said that, you know, you got this polarization of people who are extremely cautious and then people who aren't cautious at all. And we're all reading about the spikes in states that have reopened because people aren't observing social distancing, they've taken off their masks, and they're just getting more casual. Even in my area, when I go into a grocery store or places where masks are supposed to be required, I'd say probably 2/3 of the people are not using masks. And you know, most people think, well, if I go to a hotel, if I fly, if I go on a cruise, if I do anything in a theme park or an attraction, people simply aren't going to follow these rules, and it makes me more susceptible. So what are the solutions? First of all, there's the necessity to prove these things. And, you know, we know, for example, that we have to know what matters most to consumers and travelers. So we've tested a number of things, and we know that this is not a comprehensive list. And for all the researchers who are on this call, understanding that this is probably a primary opportunity for research whenever budgets are finally free to be able to pay for that type of research. Understanding also that visible displays are much more important than messaging. So if you studied at all any kind of neuroscience or understanding how the brain works, people really are making their decisions based on what they see and experience rather than what they hear. And also the importance of getting it right the first time, so that if people do give you trial, it's not necessarily, you simply can't blow it. It's got to be right all the time, first time. And if that fragile trust is broken by violations of social distancing or any of the other protocols in place to protect safety, then it's an instant credibility loser. get people to talk about it. This is one of the critical things. We know that sharing the right messages, thinking about what's tangible and shareable. So social media has always been a great tool that travel verticals have used to communicate positive messages. Most people think that social media is used to only communicate the negative. A lot of the work that I've done shows that people are much more likely, believe it or not, to tweet and put on Facebook and message about positive experiences rather than negative. So using and encouraging social media to facilitate trust and getting those visuals out to people becomes very critical. And then another thing is you're obviously keeping it local, keeping your finger on the recovery in your sector or ramp up, but basically talking about the whole notion of staycations and changing the marketing focus to really focus on local and regional tourism. That seems to be the best opportunity right now for getting people to re-engage in the travel sector. And if I'm in a marketing role, that's really the audience that I want to try to appeal to. So I'm looking and I've got 20 after, and that leaves us 10 minutes for Q&A.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Rick. This was really great. And I love the fact that you have given some recommendations to our participants. I'm going to start with Joe's question first. And he's asking, is anyone seeing more travel to stay with friends and family? I'm curious if the proportion of visitation has changed of hotels versus visiting friends and relatives versus short-term rentals. What are the things that you are seeing, especially being so involved with the hospitality industry?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Unfortunately, and I think this is great for Wave 3, we don't track when people stay with friends and family. We should. And I think that's a wonderful suggestion. So thanks to Joe for the suggestion. But what we're simply not seeing is much of a bump in intention to travel, period. The only thing that we've seen that bump in is the driving and the local and regional travel. So we've seen a little bit of a bump there. And so if your relatives and family live close, you'll travel. You're certainly not more likely to fly to see a distant relative. But maybe if your family is close and you like them and you're willing to go and stay with them, maybe that's the travel experience that people would be most likely to consider.
And Rick, are you seeing anything in regards to distance traveled? Because with local and regional aspect of marketing, sometimes with certain destinations, we are seeing a radius of 300 to 400 miles, even up to 500 miles that people are willing to travel. Whereas some other areas are very, very focused just on the residents. Is there anything that you have captured either with your interactions with clients or from the research that you have done?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's really what that one particular slide showed, is that people are willing to travel within their state and they're willing to travel within their region. So particularly within their state. So the best advice I can give to those who are in the marketing destination business, which probably most of the people on this call, is to really focus on, the things that residents can discover within their own state. So I think about the area in which I live, of all the things, the attractions that I know there's been a lot of national marketing, but I think now the target really needs to be spent. The media spend needs to be more toward, within state marketing.
Perfect. Another question is from Nandi from Virginia, and her question is there a variable in the data that can identify travelers who have taken a trip in the last year? If you look at the stats for travelers groups, if possible, is the trend similar to the general population in the sample that you're observing?
Yeah, and as I mentioned, when you look at frequent travelers, those people absolutely are much more willing to engage than the general population. And that's why some studies that you'll see, if you've been exposed to other studies, tend to show higher numbers and higher percentages that our study shows. So one of the things that I did, and this is a quick aside, I looked at segmentations by how people are feeling. So for example, there's a group, 6% of the people that I call the everything is rosy segment. And those people are willing to travel tomorrow and high degrees of engagement. But for the most part, people are still feeling relatively pessimistic. and that pessimism is driving that lack of trust. And it's about a 2-to-1 pessimistic to optimistic mix, unfortunately. And you've got about 40% in the middle and a very small group who feel optimistic and are ready to travel. So another one of the pieces of advice I've given in other contexts is really keeping the messages positive. And again, I'm sure we'd have a very healthy discussion on this, that most of what you see in terms of COVID-19 advertising is a little dreary. You know, it's all about, somber music playing in the background, and not to make light of the situation, but it reinforces kind of the dour mood that people feel about it. And one of the things that's got to happen is people need to start feeling a bit more optimistic. Now, not unrealistically optimistic, as some are prone to do, but until we're able to be more positive and engaging and show the positive experiences that come with travel, people are still driven by that sense of pessimism, and that influences their trust.
And I think we are seeing some of that in social media listening as well. There's a lot of aggravation, and it's not surprising even to see some of the challenges that cities are experiencing right now.
Yeah, and I don't want to suggest, and this is obviously a problem that we have in the media, and this is not to get political at all, but these states where you're seeing obvious spikes in coronavirus cases, where the governors of those states or politicians are saying, nothing to see here. We're not saying that, but at the same time, really, I think that a lot of the advertising I've seen seems to reinforce the dourness of the situation. So not to make too much commentary, but something to think about.
Absolutely. But just the reality that we are in, and tourism could be really powerful in terms of messaging and bringing people together and trying to get over that pessimistic perspective. So dealing with safety issues, John Knox had a question, and he's saying that tourism-dependent areas like Hawaii are under great pressure, especially with the openings as soon as possible. Do you recommend doing now or not? His question is with the openings. And Hawaii is a unique state. I believe there's no COVID-19 cases. But they have been very strict with the openings, and it's a tourism-dependent state. What are some of the takeaways that you're seeing?
Yeah, it's almost mind-boggling that Hawaii would discourage and try to do everything they can to stop tourism. But here's the thing. This is the bigger question that we're all wrestling with, right? Do you reopen and put people at some health risk, or do you tank your economy and continue to keep people isolated? My recommendation, again, if I were in politics, I would start opening up these things, but providing those assurances that we talked about in the presentation, that we're serious about these things. And there are certain stores that when you walk in, if you don't have a mask, you're told to leave. Now, I don't know that we want to do that, but maybe that's what we need to do in travel situations, that no mask, no entry. Because people really need to see that we're serious about this and build that credibility issue up that I was talking about with regard to trust, that people simply aren't believing that people are going to take those necessary steps, and we need to prove to them that we are. So back to your Hawaii question, if Hawaii starts demonstrating very visibly that they're taking these protocols seriously, then yes, open up.
Rick, also you mentioned about some of the solutions for businesses. Prove it, get people talk about it, keep it local. So from a messaging perspective, most often destinations don't really own the safety message. They're very cautious about it. So what would be your final recommendation from a destination perspective? Should they own it? Is that a topic that belongs to businesses? How should they handle that safety assurance or even pledges in terms of the programs that they're creating?
So this gets a little tricky, because one time a hotel executive told me that he didn't want to make brand promises that he couldn't keep, because if you make promises and don't keep them, it's worse than not making any promise at all. So I think destinations, I know that most destinations that I'm familiar with work very closely with their partners. And I'm hoping that those on this call will be able to work with their hotel and airline and attraction partners to communicate the importance of these safety protocols and understand people would rather have the strict safety protocols than not have them. And I mean, they'd rather put up with the friction, in some cases, even willing to pay a little more to have that. And don't be afraid to enforce those restrictions.
Yeah, I'm seeing different things in Europe, especially with the relationships amongst countries and trying to open up for tourism, like Spain, Greece, Turkey. And apparently Turkey just started a safety pledge program, which is really infused by the government. It's tourism is a big portion of the GDP. It's one of the most aggressive ones I'm seeing. I'm seeing similar things in Asia as well. And there's that political pressure to open up the borders. And at the country scale, sometimes they're trying to use it, build confidence and relationships from a political standpoint. So it will be interesting to see what happens in the US versus some of the overseas destinations that are dependent on tourism, even island destinations on the
Yeah.
Caribbean.
And I mean, and this is really the tension that we face since this thing began, right? Because, you know, there's certainly a physical danger in keeping the economy shut down for too long. I mean, if continued to be shut down and we were on lockdown, then, you know, the tourism industry which pumps millions and millions of dollars into the economy, if that remains shut down, that affects many, many people's livelihoods. And, you know, that's a disaster waiting to happen. Yet at the same time, we don't want people to get COVID-19. So the best answer, and this data I think provides the fuel behind what people are thinking, is that open up, but strongly enforce these safety protocols and do it visibly and do it in ways that people believe it and trust it. I was reading an article about the theatrics of cleaning, and I thought there was something to be said in this article, because it's the whole idea that, okay, I just clean, but maybe I continue cleaning even if I don't need to, just so that people see me constantly cleaning the hotel that I'm in. And you know, it's all about creating perception, right? And that may not be a bad idea.
Are you seeing any exemplary, like really good programs from, especially from the hotels? Some are using robotics, some are just sticking to traditional deep cleaning methods. Anything that stands out that you have seen in the hospitality industry?
Yeah, and I can tell you this, is that it's sort of a different perspective, right? Marriott is always a leader in this area, right? I mean, and also the American Hospitality and Lodging Association has put out all of these rules and guidelines for reopening hotels. All of those are really good, but the thing that the data shows is that as good as these programs are, they don't seem to be convincing people. So again, I can't say this strongly enough. It's this whole notion that trust is not based on what people say, it's on what people see and what people do. And it's thinking about these tangible ways to demonstrate these safety protocols, because for example, the work I've done over many, many years show that the smell of the hotel is a big determinant in how the person rates their guest experience. So if the hotel smells bad, then, you know, I tend to give my stay experience a fairly low rating. But what's been interesting is that in the past, we've been able to sort of identify the source of that bad smell to either people smoking in rooms when they shouldn't have, but even more importantly, strong chemical disinfectants that were used to basically clean the room. So now I'm wondering to myself whether the strong chemical disinfectants that were such a turnoff to people before might now be a reassurance to people. Don't know about that. I guess we'll see. But I think that now people really are looking for what they call the smell of clean. And that's something also that came up very highly in our study, that people really want to walk in and have it smell clean, whatever that is. So it's really demonstrating to people through the senses that, you know, these things are being practiced and making people believe it through credibility.
Yeah, I find that very interesting, that the notion of smell, how it could be a trusting factor for consumers. What about at the destination level? Some destinations are also creating pledges where they can have signs at the doors that they're part of that destination safety protocol program. Have you seen anything that relates to consumers finding that trusting source? Uh, is that a good way for destinations engage the businesses and therefore relate to consumers? Anything that relating to that?
Yeah, and I don't want to be at all negative about this, but you know, again, it's sort of like slogans and phrases and messaging and that sort of thing. Again, I'm just a researcher here, so people on the call will relate to that. You can only report what the data is telling you, and the data is telling me that none of this is working. So we ask ourselves the questions, well, why isn't it working? And that's where we came to, the conclusions that we shared. So I think these are good, but you don't want to, again, you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're promising and pledging things that for whatever reason are not, it's not sustainable. And it becomes really
Tricky.
everyone's responsibility to practice these things.
And Rick, before we wrap up, lastly, what are your expectations in terms of recovery? Of course, forecasting is a tricky thing right now, but so far, what we are seeing is probably with international markets recovering later. For the US, some of the expectations are 2020, 2023, is timeline for the recovery. Everyone is anticipating a muted recovery so far. What are you seeing from your data and with your conversations with industry partners?
Well, we've actually, like I said, we've actually developed a forecasting tool that's allowed us to forecast, people's travel, and we've been able to validate it pretty well against actual behavior. But the big X in the equation is the vaccine, right? It's really hard to make any kind of a prediction with any credibility until we know what the timetable is for the vaccine. I think as long as there's not a vaccine, as long as the number of coronavirus cases continues to spike, it's going to be very muted. And again, I think people do have pent-up demand, no doubt about it. People do want to get out of the house. My wife and I, sometimes we're a little crazy being in the house all the time, and we'll just drive around. We'll just drive around to get out, right? So I mean, there's that natural part of it that really wants to get out. But I think again, it's a great opportunity for local travel, and I think also if you're in a destination, if you work with a destination that's had a lot of unexplored opportunity, and like right now I'm talking to the Nebraska Tourism Association, and Nebraska is not a state where a lot of people may have considered taking their vacation, but there's a lot of wide open spaces, and there's a lot of things that if you've got a destination like that, I think it's a real opportunity.
Absolutely. That was a really good remark. And I feel like at times we quit living once, especially the tourism industry was at a halt. Things are recovering slowly, but definitely a muted recovery is on the road, but we cannot stop living.
Well, it's funny because for a long time in recent years, we've talked about the problem of over-tourism. I think that problem has probably been resolved for a while. And now like I say, it's an opportunity for less explored destinations and destinations with more outdoor options. So, again, it's always an opportunity for somebody, right, if they seize it.
And an opportunity to go back and revisit the under-tourism and what it means to certain destinations, especially from a rural perspective, economic development. I think it's going to open up different framework, different paradigm.
Well, and the other thing too that a lot of millennials look for, and we see this in our millennial research, that they're looking for those authentic experiences. Now, what's an authentic experience? Well, certainly those places where under tourism has existed or less developed places, you get more of that authentic experience, and that's what people are looking for too.
Thank you. I love the way that you formulated proof, get people talk about it, and keep it local from the perspective of how to make messaging real and applicable to consumers. That was awesome. And trust is going to be an important element, not only from destination branding, but from B2 consumers' perspective as we move forward. Rick,
Yep.
it was a pleasure having you here today. Thank you for your time. We are going to have the slides available to everyone. And Marketing Outlook, just a reminder to everyone, Marketing Outlook Forum is in October. Rick is going to be there as well. He's joining us from Pittsburgh today, and hopefully things are going to be more opened up by then.
Well, that would be
your
wonderful.
time.
And can I just say this? Thank you, Ezra, and thank you to the TTRA. And please, for anybody attending, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at the email address on there. I love talking about these things, and now more than ever, we need to be in touch and networking with one another. So thank you, Ezra.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.